You walk along the cobbled street as evening settles over the town, your boots making a soft, steady sound on the stones that fades into the hush of closing doors and drawn curtains. The gas lamps have been lit, and each one casts a small pool of orange light that barely touches the brick walls of the terraced houses, leaving the upper windows in darkness. A faint mist hangs in the air, not enough to be called a fog, but enough to make the lamplight seem softer and the distances between things feel a little greater. You know the way without thinking about it. Turning left at the corner where the ironmonger's shop sits dark and silent, then right past the long wall of the mill's warehouse, its high windows blank and black, reflecting nothing. The street leads down a gentle slope toward the river, and soon you hear the low, steady sound of water moving over the weir, a sound that never stops, day or night. The air carries a cooler breath from the river, mixing with the smell of damp wool and coal smoke that hangs over the whole district. Ahead, the mill gate stands open, a wide iron arch with a small door cut into the larger gate, and above it a single lantern burns, its flame sheltered behind a sooty glass pane. You pass through the wicket door and step into the mill yard, which is paved with large flagstones worn smooth by decades of feet. The yard is quiet now, entirely empty, though during the day it bustles with carts and lorries and the voices of workers. In the middle of the yard stands the main mill building, 5 stories tall, with rows of identical windows, their frames painted a dark color that the evening light makes look black. To your right, set a little apart, is the engine house, a lower brick structure with a squat chimney rising from its roof. A thin wisp of steam still curls from the chimney top, pale against the deepening blue of the sky. The engine house door is a heavy wooden thing with iron strap hinges, and a warm glow leaks from the gap at its base. You push the door open and step inside. The first thing you notice is the warmth, a dry, enveloping heat that wraps around you immediately, chasing away the damp chill from the river. The second thing is the smell, a mixture of hot iron, mineral oil, and a faint sweetness from the tallow used in the grease cups. The room is not large, perhaps 20 feet square, with whitewashed walls that have yellowed over time from the heat and the oil lamps. High up, 2 small windows let in the last grey light of evening, but they are too grimy to show any detail of the sky. Most of the light in the room comes from an oil lamp hanging from a bracket near the boiler, its flame steady and bright. The boiler itself dominates the space, a long horizontal cylinder of riveted iron set into a brick setting that rises to chest height. Its curved top is painted a dull black, and from it a confusion of pipes run upward and outward, some wrapped in frayed cloth, lagging tied with twine. The pressure gauge, a brass dial with a glass face, is mounted on a stand near the boiler front, and beside it the water gauge glass glows with a pale amber light, the water inside trembling faintly. The stationary steam engine stands beyond the boiler, a mass of dark metal and heavy flywheel, but right now it is completely still, its polished rods and spinning parts frozen in place. The only movement in the room is the slow, almost imperceptible dance of shadows cast by the lamp flame, and the only sound is a soft tick, tick, tick of cooling metal somewhere inside the engine frame. The day fireman is standing by the boiler, wiping his hands on a piece of cotton waste. He is a man of middle years, with a lined face and a grey cloth cap pulled down over his forehead. His coat is hung on a peg near the door, and his sleeves are rolled up, showing forearms darkened by coal dust and streaked with oil. He looks up when you enter, and his expression is calm, expectant, neither hurried nor slow. He gives you a quiet nod, and you return it, moving to stand near the boiler where the warmth is most pleasant. In a low voice he tells you about the shift just ending, how the water level in the glass has held steady all afternoon, how the firebed is still blowing deep orange from the last stoking, and how the pressure gauge has barely drifted since the engine was shut down at 6 o'clock. He gestures with the rag toward the ash pit door, saying that he pulled a small amount of ash an hour ago, and that the ash pan is nearly empty. He points to the grease cup on the nearest bearing and mentions that he filled it at 5, but the others will need seeing to before midnight. You listen quietly, taking in each piece of information as it comes, letting it settle in your mind like pebbles dropping into still water. His voice is matter of fact without any hint of hurry or impatience, and the words seem to blend with the steady warmth of the room until they become part of the background, like the tick of the metal. When he has finished, he hands you the long iron shovel, its handle worn smooth from countless hands, and a small tin of tallow that feels cool and dense in your palm. The handles of these tools are warm from lying near the boiler, and they fit your grip as naturally as if you had held them many times before, which you have. He reaches up to the peg and pulls on his coat, buttoning it slowly from collar to waist, then takes a flat cap from his pocket and settles it on his head. He walks to the door with the unhurried gait of a man who has done this 1,000 times, and you follow him as far as the threshold. Outside, the yard is now fully dark, but the sky still holds a faint band of deep blue above the rooftops. The dayman pauses for a moment, looking up at the stars just beginning to show. Then he turns and gives you one more nod, as if to say that all is well and the night is yours. His footsteps fade across the flagstones, heading for the wicket door in the gate, and then for a long moment there is nothing but the faint whisper of the river and the distant bark of a dog somewhere in the town. You close the engine house door gently, feeling the latch settle into place with a soft click, and the sound seems to seal the room off from the rest of the world. Now the engine house belongs entirely to you for the whole long night shift, and the silence inside is different from the silence outside, fuller and closer. A silence that contains within it the memory of the day's labor and the promise of the morning's return to motion. You stand for a short while just inside the door, letting your eyes travel slowly over every part of the room, not because you need to inspect it, but because it is your habit to settle into the space and let the familiar surroundings become a part of your awareness. The boiler clicks softly as a section of its iron shell adjusts to the slow loss of heat, a single metallic sound that comes and goes without any urgency. The lamp flame behind its glass chimney stands tall and almost motionless, with only an occasional flutter when an imperceptible draft slips under the door. You notice the way the lamplight catches the edge of the flywheel, tracing a thin silver line along the rim, and how the shadows behind the pipes form deep, shapeless pools that seem to hold the warmth within them. The floor under your boots is made of thick wooden planks, stained dark with years of oil drips, and they yield ever so slightly when you shift your weight, absorbing the sound of your movement. The whole room feels like the inside of a great sleeping animal, breathing slowly and steadily, waiting for the moment when it will be woken. After a few minutes you cross to the small wooden shelf fixed to the wall near the boiler, where the previous shift has left a few things for you: a clean rag folded neatly, a tin of matches, a spare wick for the lamp. You set the tallow tin beside them and lean the shovel against the brickwork, its blade resting softly on the floor. Then you turn your attention to the boiler itself. You lift the iron door of the firebox, its weight familiar in your hand, and the heat that washes out is immediate and strong, yet not fierce. Inside, the firebed lies low and even, a bed of glowing embers that pulse with a deep orange and occasional flickers of red when the draught moves through the ash pit below. The coal has burned down to a fine crust of ash on the surface, but beneath that crust, the heart of the fire is still healthy. You close the door quietly, feeling the warmth retreat but linger on your face, and you look at the water gauge glass. The water sits at a steady 3/4 full, just as the dayman said, and the surface of the water within the glass trembles with a constant tiny shiver that tells you the water in the boiler is still warm enough to produce a faint steam cushion above it. The brass fittings of the gauge are warm to the touch, but not hot, and you can see your own reflection faintly in the polished surface, a blurred shape with no details. You walk around to the side of the boiler, where the ash pit door is located, a smaller iron door at ground level. Pulling it open, you see the ash pan, a shallow iron tray that catches the fine grey powder that falls through the grate bars. It is nearly empty, as promised, and you take the small rake that hangs on a hook nearby, a simple tool with a long handle and a flat blade at the end, to draw out the last few handfuls of ash into the edge of the pan. You do this very slowly, so as not to raise any dust, and the ash slides with a soft sighing sound into the pile. The ash is still slightly warm, carrying a smell of spent coal that is dry and clean, not unpleasant. You close the ash pit door and wipe your hands on the rag from the shelf, noticing how the cloth immediately picks up a fine grey smudge. The small tasks are already beginning to feel like a kind of quiet conversation with the machinery, each action answered by sound or a sensation that tells you everything is in order. Next, you go to the coal bunker, a wooden bin built into the corner of the engine house, filled with a pile of bituminous coal that glitters dully in the lamplight. The lumps vary in size, but most are about as big as your fist, broken with sharp edges and showing the occasional seam of brighter black that catches the light. You pick up the shovel and use it to select 6 pieces of coal. Not the largest ones, but those of a medium size that will burn steadily without smothering the fire. You lay them out in a neat row on the floor plates in front of the boiler, each one placed with a small, deliberate motion. The sound of the coal knocking gently against the iron plates is a soft, dull chime that fades immediately. The row of black lumps sits waiting, and you know that through the night you will feed them one by one into the fire, at intervals that your body will feel rather than a clock measure. This is the rhythm of the night, a rhythm as old as the engine itself, and it begins to settle into your bones as you stand there, looking at the simple row of coal. The engine house has 2 oil lamps, and though the first one is burning well, the second hangs dark on its bracket near the coal bunker. You decide to light it now, so that the far corner of the room will not be in shadow when you come to shovel coal later. You lower the lamp by its chain, the links cold in your fingers, and lift off the glass chimney carefully. The wick is still long enough, but you trim away the charred edge with the small shears from the shelf, letting the tiny black particles fall into a tin lid. Then you pour paraffin from the stoneware jug into the font, the liquid smelling sweet and cold, and you fill it until the level is just below the rim. The wick soaks up the oil with a slow, patient eagerness, and you strike a match, holding the flame to the wick until it catches with a soft, popping sound. You replace the chimney and adjust the wick so the flame burns tall and steady without smoking, watching the light spread across the whitewashed walls and pick out the rough texture of the brickwork. When you hang the lamp back on its brackets, the whole room now glows with a warm, even light, and the shadows have drawn back to the furthest corners, leaving the space in front of the boiler a pool of comfort and clarity. With both lamps lit, you take a moment to stand near the boiler again and simply listen. The ticking of the cooling engine has nearly stopped now, replaced by an even deeper quiet, a kind of listening silence that seems to press gently against your ears. The faint hum of the oil lamps is there as you attend to it, a soft note that never wavers. Outside, the town has fallen entirely asleep, and no sound of cartwheels or voices reaches you through the thick walls. Even the river seems to have lowered its voice, or perhaps your ears have simply grown used to it. The pressure gauge needle rests a little below 40 pounds, and you know that when you open the damper a small amount, the draft will stir the fire and the needle will begin its slow, steady climb. But for now, everything is perfectly still, and you let yourself inhabit this stillness completely, feeling it soak into your breathing until your own body matches the pace of the room. The long shift stretches ahead of you like a dark, quiet road with no bends, and there is nowhere else you need to be. Nothing else you need to do except to be here, watching the water glass, listening to the breath of the fire, and waiting for the first stoking of the night. With the dayman gone and the engine house door closed firmly against the yard, you stand for a moment in the new stillness, letting your eyes travel over the great boiler that will be your companion through the long, dark hours. The boiler is a long, horizontal cylinder of wrought iron, its plates joined by rows of rivets that march in steady lines from end to end, and the whole shell is set into a casing of red brick that rises to the height of your chest, its top surface warm under your palm when you rest your hand there. The brickwork is old, with shallow cracks veining its surface like the lines on a work-worn hand, and here and there a patch of whitewash still clings to the mortar, flaking gently from decades of heating and cooling. A soft, inward breath of air draws through the iron fire door at the near end, and you can feel the faint vibration of that draft as a cool thread against the general warmth that fills the engine house. You step closer to the boiler front and take hold of the iron handle that opens the fire door, a heavy bar with a wooden grip worn smooth by the hands of many firemen before you. The door lifts on its hinges, not with a sudden movement, but with a slow, careful pull that lets the rising heat touch your face gradually, so that you feel it first as a mild pressure on your forehead and cheeks, then as a deeper warmth that reaches down to your chin and neck before you have the door fully open. Inside the firebox, the firebed rests in its low night condition, a mound of embers that glows with a deep orange color, pulsing softly as the chimney draft breathes across its surface. The coals that burn through the afternoon have settled into a close-packed bed, their edges rounded and softened by ash, and the spaces between them hold small, flickering halos of blue flame that appear and vanish without any pattern you could predict. You watch the firebed for a long count of 10, seeing how the center glows the brightest, while the edges near the brick walls are already darkening to a reddish-grey crust, and you note that the dayman left the fire in good heart, even and deep, with no thin spots where the grate might show through. After closing the fire door, you turn to the water gauge glass, which is mounted on the side of the boiler in a delicate brass frame that catches the lamplight in a thin golden line around its edges. The gauge glass itself is a thick, clear tube about the length of your hand, and inside it the water sits entirely still now that the engine has stopped, its surface a flat, dark line that cuts across the glass at a point 3/4 of the way up from the bottom fitting. You put your face close to the glass, noticing how the water is slightly darker than the steam space above it, and how a single tiny bubble clings to the inner wall of the tube just above the waterline, not moving at all in the grey quiet. The brass fittings at top and bottom of the glass are tight and dry, with no telltale weeping of moisture around the threads, and the small guard rod that runs down the outside of the glass stands true and unbent, exactly as it should be for a long shift without trouble. Beneath the firebox, at the very base of the boiler front, you now open the ash pit door, a smaller square of iron that swings downward on a pair of stiff hinges that complain with a low, dry sound before falling into place. The ash pit is a shallow space directly under the grate bars, and when you look inside you see a thin, even layer of pale grey ash, as fine as flour, that has fallen through from the dying fire overhead. You take up the small iron rake that leans against the boiler brickwork, its handle cool and slightly rough with rust pitting, and you insert its flat, toothed end into the ash pit with a gentle scraping motion that draws the ash toward the front opening without raising any cloud of dust into the still air of the engine house. The ash collects in a soft pile on the floor plate just outside the ash pit door, and you scoop it with a small tin pan into the ash bucket that stands ready in the corner, doing this in several light passes until the pit floor is clean, and the grate bars are visible again as a row of dark, parallel ribs above the empty space. The ash bucket is now half full, and its contents are only faintly warm to the touch, giving off no smoke or smell, just the dry, earthy scent of burned coal that has given up all its heat and is ready to be carried outside when morning comes. Once the ash pit is clear, you walk the few steps to the coal bunker built into the corner of the engine house, a wooden bin lined with tin sheeting to keep the coal dust from sifting through the boards. The bunker holds about 1/4 ton of bituminous coal, pieces that range in size from small egg-shaped lumps to larger chunks the size of your fist, all of it dark and faintly shiny where fresh surfaces catch the lamplight. You take the long iron shovel from its place against the wall, feeling the solid weight of it as you slide the blade under the coal pile and lift a modest load, not too heavy because the night shift requires only small feedings at long intervals. You carry the shovelful to a clear space in the iron floor plates near the boiler front, and there you begin to lay out a careful row of 6 pieces of coal, placing each one with a quiet clink on the metal. You choose pieces that are not too large, about the size of a teacup each, and you set them in a neat line with a small gap between them so that later you can lift each piece easily without having to sort through a jumble in the half-darkness if the lamp should need trimming. The coal pieces are cool and slightly greasy to the touch, leaving a faint dark smudge on your fingertips that you wipe away with the cotton rag that always hangs from your belt loop. Standing back from the row of coal, you now look once more at the whole boiler, from its brick setting to its pressure gauge, a round brass dial mounted on a pipe that rises from the steam space above the water. The needle of the gauge points to a number that you read without really counting, because your eyes have learned the shape of the correct position just as they know the shape of a full water glass or a clean ash pit. And you see that the steam pressure has fallen to a low, resting level, a gentle 10 pounds on the dial that will rise slowly once the fire is fed and the damper is opened. For now, the boiler holds its heat like a sleeping animal, and you are simply the one who watches and does not disturb it, moving through the small, unhurried tasks that fill the hours between sunset and sunrise with a rhythm as steady as the ticking of a clock that you never look at, because you measure time by the slow fall of the water level and the dimming of the fire and the soft changes in the draft that crosses the chimney top high above the mill roof, where the night air presses down with all its cool weight. The evening outside has now deepened into a full night, the small windows of the engine house showing only a uniform blackness pressing against the glass, unmarked by moon or star. Inside, the boiler's glow and the single lamp by the water gauge are not quite enough to push the shadows back from the furthest corners, and you know that the long hours ahead will be easier with both lamps burning steadily, their combined light washing the whitewashed walls and the dark iron of the engine with a calm, even clarity. So you turn now to the second lamp, the one that hangs above the coal bunker on a simple iron bracket, its chain cold and still in the motionless air, its glass chimney faintly clouded with the residue of the previous night's burning. You reach up and take hold of the lamp by its bottom ring, lifting it slightly to unhook the chain from the bracket, then lowering it hand over hand until the lamp rests on the wooden shelf against the wall. The shelf is a plain board, slightly warped by years of warmth and oil vapor, but it is sturdy, and it holds your spare wick box, a tin of matches, and the squat stoneware jug of paraffin that the dayman keeps filled. You set the lamp down carefully, its brass font still half full from the last shift, but with the wick burned down to a crusted, uneven stub that will not draw well if left untrimmed. First you lift the glass chimney free, gripping it gently near the base where the glass is thickest, and you set it aside on the shelf where it catches the light from the other lamp in a faint, watery ring. The chimney is warm from the proximity of the boiler, though the lamp itself has not been lit, and a thin film of soot clings to the inside, dulling its clarity. You take a piece of soft cotton rag, the one from your belt loop, and you bunch it loosely in your hand, pushing it inside the chimney with a careful twisting motion that polishes the glass without pressing hard enough to risk a crack. The soot comes away easily, leaving the chimney clear and bright, and you hold it up to the other lamp to check for any smears, satisfied to see the flame shine through as a neat, unfractured point of light. With the chimney clean, you turn to the wick. The small pair of shears lives in a tin box on the shelf, and you open the lid with a soft scrape of metal on metal, taking out the shears and testing their action once, the two blades closing with a precise, oiled silence. You raise the wick a little by turning the small brass wheel on the side of the burner, and you see that the top is dry and charred, a ragged black fringe that would smoke if lit. Holding the shears horizontally, you cut away the darkened portion in one smooth motion, letting the tiny black fragments fall into the tin lid that you have placed on the shelf to catch them. The fresh wick beneath is pale and clean, and you lower it again until only a thin white line shows above the burner slot, ready to draw oil when the font is filled. The stoneware jug is heavy, its glazed surface cool and smooth against your hands, and you lift it with the care of long practice, tipping it slowly so that the paraffin runs into the lamp font in a thin, clear stream that makes a soft, gurgling sound as the air escapes. The oil smells sweet and faintly cold, a scent that fills the space around the shelf and blends with the warmer smells of hot iron and tallow that already live in the engine house. You fill the font until the oil is just below the lip of the filler hole, giving it room to expand as the lamp warms up later. Then you wipe the rim with the rag to remove any drips before they can catch a stray spark. Now you take a match from the tin, a long wooden splint with a pink head that smells of sulfur, and you strike it against the rough strip on the side of the box. The match flares with a bright, brief hiss, and you touch the flame to the wick, watching as the oil-soaked cotton catches light with a soft pop, then settles into a small, steady flame that flickers blue at the base and gold at the tip. You wait a few seconds for the flame to strengthen, then you pick up the glass chimney and lower it carefully over the burner, seating it into the brass holder with a gentle twist. With the chimney in place, the flame rises taller and brighter, drawing the draft up through the base holes, and you adjust the wick wheel until the flame stands exactly 1 inch high, a neat tongue of light that burns without a whisper of smoke. You lift the lamp by its top ring and carry it back to the bracket near the coal bunker, your shadows swinging across the whitewashed wall in a great, slow arc as you move. Hanging the lamp is a simple matter of fitting the ring over the hook, and when you let go, the lamp sways just once, a gentle pendulum motion that makes the shadows dance for a breath before it settles into perfect stillness. The new light spreads across the coal bunker, picking out the dark, glistening faces of the coal lumps and deepening the shadows behind the pile into a soft, velvety black. The iron floor plates glimmer where the light strikes their smooth patches, and the long handle of the shovel, still leaning where you left it near the boiler, casts a thin, sharp shadow across the planks. The engine house now seems a different place than it was when only one lamp burned. The combined light from the two lamps meets in the middle of the room, near the flywheel, and the great iron disc seems to absorb the glow rather than reflect it, its dark surface drinking the lamplight until it becomes a deep, fathomless brown, like the surface of a pool under a cloudy sky. The spokes of the flywheel throw faint shadows against the far wall, a pattern of 6 dark limbs radiating from a central shadow that does not move. The lever belt that connects the flywheel to the line shafting in the spinning shed is a pale, dusty ribbon looping up into the darkness near the ceiling, its surface cracked in 1,000 fine lines from years of flexing around the pulleys. Nothing moves, but the light seems to hold everything in a state of quiet readiness, as if the engine were not asleep but merely waiting. You walk slowly around the engine, letting the light fall on each part in turn, not because you need to inspect it, but because it is your habit to know the look of the machinery at night when it is still, and to be able to picture it later with your eyes closed. The main cylinder stands upright near the flywheel, a dark column of iron with a polished rod emerging from its top end, the rod itself wrapped in a thin coating of oil that shines like a wet stone. The valve gear beside the cylinder is a nest of small rods and levers, all motionless now but connected by bright steel pins that catch the lamplight in sharp points of white. The crosshead slide, a heavy iron block that runs in a channel of polished metal, sits at the bottom of its stroke, and you can see the fine scoring on its surface where months of travel have worn a smooth path. The whole engine is a map of small marks and shiny edges, and in the lamplight each one seems to tell a part of the story of its daytime motion, a story that is now paused, held in suspension like the steam in the boiler. Your attention returns to the first lamp, the one by the water gauge, and you walk over to check that it is still burning as it should. The flame inside its chimney is steady, slightly lower than before but still tall and bright, and you give the wick a tiny turn to raise it back to its proper height. The light falls directly on the water gauge glass, and you can see the dark column of water within it quite clearly, its surface flat and still, the only thing in the room that seems to contain its own secret movement, the quiet, hidden translation of heat into pressure deep inside the boiler shell. You take a few moments now to stand by the boiler and look around the engine house as a whole, seeing how the two pools of lamplight overlap and merge in the center, leaving the corners in a soft brown shadow that is warm and comfortable rather than dark and cold. The whitewashed walls, marked here and there with the faint ghosts of old splashes and handprints, glow with a buttery color, and the roof beams, rough-hewn pine darkened by a century of oil vapor, disappear into a soft haze of reflected light. The brick floor near the fire door is swept clean. The iron plates are free of any loose coal. The ash bucket stands neatly in its corner with a rake beside it, and the shovel rests exactly where you placed it. Everything is in order, and the engine house feels like a small, warm world, complete in itself, set apart from the sleeping town and the dark mill yard and the slow, cold river beyond the gates. With the lamps now burning in their steady, companionable way, you take your place on the upturned wooden box near the wall, the same box that has sat in that spot for as long as anyone remembers, its surface polished by the seat of many night shifts into a dark, almost glossy sheen. From this seat you can see the water gauge and the pressure gauge and the edge of the fire door all at once, and you can hear the soft notes of the engine house, the faint hum of the lamps, the barely perceptible draw of the chimney draught, the creak of a cooling brick somewhere in the boiler setting, the occasional tick of the hot metal giving up its daytime expansion. You fold your hands on your knees and let the warmth of the room settle around your shoulders, and you do not think of anything in particular, because thinking is not required here. The lamps will burn for many hours yet before you need to trim them again, and by then the night will be half over, and the fire will have been fed, and the water will have been checked, and the quiet will have deepened further into its own peaceful, unbroken rhythm. The row of 6 coal pieces still waits on the iron floor plates where you laid them out earlier. their dark surfaces now catching the light from both lamps in dull, oily glints. The fire behind the iron door has settled further since you last looked, the deep orange of the ember bed slowly dimming to a darker red, and you know that the moment for the first proper stoking of the night shift has arrived. There is no clock that tells you this, no signal from the mill outside, only the quiet understanding that the fire must not be allowed to fall below the temperature where it can recover easily, and that a small feeding now will prevent a larger effort later. You rise from the wooden box and move toward the boiler front, your boots making the same soft sound on the planks that they have made 100 times already this evening. You take up the shovel from where it leans against the warm brickwork, feeling its weight settle into your right hand while your left hand finds the wooden grip of the fire door handle. The iron of the door handle is hot enough that you would not want to hold it for long, but your touch is brief and practiced, lifting the door upward on its hinge with a smooth, steady pull that lets the heat rush out in a wave you are already braced to meet. The firebox yawns open before you, a square mouth of brick and iron filled with the breathing glow of the dying embers, and you pause for a moment to read the condition of the firebed with eyes that have learned to see the difference between a fire that is merely resting and one that is failing. The bed is still deep and even, lying across the great bars like a rumpled blanket of orange and grey, and here and there a brighter spot winks at you as a hidden coal shifts and a fresh facet is exposed to the draught. The ash crust on the surface is thin and soft, not yet thick enough to choke the air from below, and you judge that the fire will take the fresh coal eagerly and without any risk of quenching. You bend to the row of coal pieces and touch the shovel blade to the floor plate, sliding it under the first lump with a small scraping sound. The piece of coal is cool and angular, fitting into the shallow curve of the shovel as if it were made to lie there, and you lift it without haste, carrying it the short distance to the open fire door. Here you tilt the shovel gently, not tossing the coal but guiding it into the firebox, and you place it deliberately on the left side of the firebed where the glow is a little thinner, a patch of duller embers that will benefit most from the fresh fuel. The coal settles into the bed with a soft, crunching sound, its sharp edges pressing into the hot ash and releasing a first, tentative wisp of pale smoke that rises and curls toward the back of the firebox. You withdraw the shovel and turn back to the row, scooping up a second lump and carrying it with the same slow care, this time placing it on the right side of the firebed to balance the load. The second piece lands with a heavier sound, a solid clunk that tells you the ember bed beneath it is firmer there, and the smoke that follows is a little thicker, a soft grey ribbon that unwinds and finds the flue opening with a gentle searching motion. You lay the shovel aside for a moment and look into the firebox once more, studying how the two new pieces of coal sit among the embers, their black shapes stark against the orange glow, like small islands of night floating on a sea of quiet fire. The coal on the left has already begun to show a faint blush of red along its lowest edge, where the weight of the piece presses into the hot ash and the heat begins its slow work of driving out the volatile gases that sleep inside the stone. The piece on the right is slower to catch, its surface still dark and glossy, but you can see a tiny wavering flame start at the point where it touches a brighter ember, a blue-edged flicker that licks upward and vanishes, then appears again a little stronger, as if the fire is tasting the new fuel and finding it good. The low crackling sound that now comes from the firebox is the first change in the engine house's steady quiet, a sound like tissue paper being crumpled far away, and it joins the hum of the lamps and the whisper of the chimney draught as a new strand in the long braid of the night. You do not close the door immediately, because you want to watch the flame take hold properly, and because there is something in the way the fire awakens that never grows old, no matter how many night shifts you have stood in this same spot. The gases rising from the new coal ignite in pale dancing sheets that spread across the surface of the lumps, blue at first, then yellow as the heat increases, and the whole firebox seems to brighten by a small but definite degree. The embers that were grey-crusted a moment ago now shake off their ash coverings as the draught strengthens, and they glow with a renewed urgency, sending up a shower of tiny sparks that swirl once around the firebox roof before vanishing up the flue. The firebed begins to breathe with a deeper rhythm, a slow inhalation that draws the flames toward the back of the box, followed by a soft exhalation that pushes them forward again, and this gentle pulse makes the whole glowing mass seem like a living thing that has stirred in its sleep and is now settling back into a more comfortable position. When you are satisfied that both new pieces of coal are well alight and that the fire has accepted the offering without hesitation, you reach for the shovel once more and bring across a third lump. This one's slightly smaller than the first two, about the size of a hen's egg. You place it carefully between the two burning pieces, bridging the small gap where the ember bed was brightest, and it catches almost immediately, its edges glowing within the space of a few breaths, the flames leaping across its surface with an eager golden vigor. The firebox is now filled with a cheerful, steady light, and the heat pouring through the open door is strong enough that you take a half step back, wiping your forehead with the back of your sleeve in a gesture so habitual that you do not notice yourself doing it. With the coal in place and burning well, you close the fire door, lowering it gently until the latch catches with a solid, reassuring click that you feel through the soles of your boots. The engine house seems suddenly quieter after the open roar of the firebox, the lamp flames standing straight and still once more, their light no longer competing with the fierce orange glow. But the change in the room is more than just the absence of the open door. There is now a new quality to the warmth that radiates from the boiler front, a deeper, more penetrating heat that you can feel beginning to soak through the fabric of your coat, and you know that the boiler is starting to respond to the fresh fuel, the water inside its shell absorbing the rising temperature molecule by molecule, building a quiet pressure that will soon show itself on the brass dial. You turn now to the damper, a small iron wheel set into the chimney pipe just above the boiler, connected by a rod to a flap deep inside the flue that controls how much air is drawn through the firebed from the ash pit below. The damper is open only a quarter turn, just enough to keep a gentle draft moving through the fire during the low period between stokings. You take hold of the wheel, its rim cool and rough with a coating of fine rust, and you turn it slowly a further quarter turn, opening the airway a little more to feed the new fire the oxygen it now craves. As you turn, you hear the draft respond, a soft, hungry sound that rises in pitch by the smallest degree, a sound like a distant wind heard through a keyhole, and you feel the air near the ash pit door quicken as it is pulled into the space beneath the grate. The chimney above the engine house will be carrying a slightly darker plume now, a thin grey column that rises into the night sky and disperses among the stars, though no one in the sleeping town will look up to see it. The pressure gauge on its brass stand is the next thing your eyes find, and you watch it closely, knowing that the needle will not move immediately, but wanting to fix its current position in your memory so that the eventual change will be unmistakable. The needle stands a little below 40 pounds, its black point resting quietly on the white enamel of the dial, and the glass space over it is perfectly clean, polished earlier in the day by the dayman, or perhaps by yourself, during a quiet moment on a previous shift you cannot quite recall. You stand with your hands loosely at your sides, your weight on both feet, and you let your breathing slow to match the rhythm of the boiler, feeling the minutes pass not as a succession of ticking moments, but as a smooth, continuous flow that carries you gently toward the next small task. Slowly, so slowly that at first you are not sure you are seeing it at all, the needle begins to stir. It does not jump or swing, but rather it eases itself away from its resting point with the deliberate patience of something that has all the time in the world. You watch the black point creep across the white dial, passing the 40-pound mark with a silence so complete that it seems louder than any sound could be, and it continues its gentle drift upward, pausing now and then as if to gather its strength, then resuming its quiet progress. You know that the water in the boiler is now expanding with the heat, its molecules moving faster and faster as the fire beneath sends its warmth upward through the iron shell, and the steam that fills the space above the water is growing denser, pressing outward against the riveted plates with a force that is invisible but very real. The boiler is coming back to life, not with a rush or a roar, but with a measured, inevitable return that feels as natural as the rising of sap in a spring tree. When the needle reaches 45 pounds, you give the damper wheel a small turn back, closing it by perhaps an eighth of a full turn to steady the rise, because you do not need the pressure to climb quickly, only to hold a steady plateau through the long middle hours of the night. The draft adjusts itself to the new setting with a barely audible sigh, and the fire settles into a new equilibrium behind the iron door, its crackling softening to a low, constant murmur. The pressure gauge needle slows its climb and then stops, hovering just above 45 pounds. And it remains there with the quiet immobility of a thing that has found its proper place and intends to stay. You step back from the boiler front and let your gaze travel once more around the engine house, noting that everything remains exactly as it should be. The water glass still shows the dark column of water at 3/4 full, its surface as flat as a polished tabletop, undisturbed by any sudden boiling. The ash pit door is closed and cool, the ash bucket still half full and waiting for the morning. The two lamps continue to burn with steady, upright flames, their oil levels still high enough that you will not need to refill them for several hours. The flywheel stands in its eternal stillness, its great mass a patient anchor at the center of the room, and the leather belt that will tomorrow spin the line shafting through the mill hangs slack and quiet in the shadows near the ceiling. The engine house is a world in balance, a small, warm pocket of order in the vast darkness of the sleeping countryside, and you are the quiet center of that world, the one who watches and tends and keeps everything in its proper relation to everything else. The first stoking of the night is now complete, and the fire has returned the boiler to its gentle, breathing life, a life that will sustain itself through the hours ahead with only the smallest additional feedings at long, unhurried intervals. You return the shovel to its place against the warm brickwork, its blade still carrying a faint smear of fresh coal dust, and you walk back to the upturned wooden box, settling onto its smooth, familiar surface with a quiet sigh of your own. From here you can see the pressure gauge needle sitting at its steady point, the water glass glowing softly in the lamplight, and the fire door with its thin, bright line of escaping light around the edges, a line that flickers almost imperceptibly as the flames inside move through their slow, endless dance. The engine house hums with a contented sound, the combined note of lamps and draught and distant river and settling brick, and you fold your hands once more on your knees, letting the night carry you forward into its deep and peaceful middle. With the fire now burning steadily behind the iron door and the pressure gauge needle resting at its comfortable 45 pounds, you let your attention turn from the boiler to the silent engine that waits across the room. The great machine stands in its stillness like a sleeping iron creature, all its polished rods and heavy castings holding the memory of the day's motion within their metal. Your next task is one that belongs to the night shift, as surely as the stoking of the fire, a slow and careful round of the grease cups that feed the engine's many bearings, and you take up the small tin of tallow and the wooden spatula from the shelf where they always wait, their surface is cool and familiar in your hands. The tallow tin is a simple round box of tin plate with a snug-fitting lid that you prise off with a gentle twist, revealing the pale, creamy grease inside. The tallow has the color of fresh butter left cool in a dairy, a soft ivory that catches the lamplight in a gentle sheen across its smooth surface, and its smell is mild and clean, like plain soap melted slowly over a low fire with a faint undertone of something that might once have been animal fat rendered long ago in a different part of the mill. You dip the tip of the wooden spatula into the tallow and lift a small dollop that sits on the flat blade like a soft pearl, holding its shape without dripping, exactly the right consistency for the work ahead. The spatula itself is a worn and humble tool, a strip of beechwood smoothed by countless nights of this same duty until its edges are rounded and its surface shines with the oil it has carried into 100 brass cups, and it fits your grip as naturally as a spoon fits the hand at supper. You begin your round at the crankshaft bearing, which is the large bearing that supports the main shaft, where it emerges from the engine frame closest to the flywheel. The grease cup here is a small brass cylinder with a screw-down lid, mounted on top of the bearing housing by a short threaded neck, and it is warm to the touch from the day's running. Though the engine has been still for several hours now, you unscrew the lid with a slow turn of your fingers, feeling the fine threads engage smoothly because the dayman has kept them clean, and you set the lid aside on a clean rag that you have spread on the floor plate beside your knee. Inside the cup, the old grease is darkened with use, its color now a deep honey brown rather than the pale ivory of the fresh tallow, and it has thinned in the heat so that it sits in the bottom of the cup like a heavy syrup rather than a firm paste. You take the spatula and scoop out this old grease with careful scraping motions, lifting it away and wiping it onto the rag, doing this 2 or 3 times until the brass interior of the cup is clean and bright, its bottom showing the small hole that leads down into the bearing itself. With the cup empty and clean, you take a fresh portion of tallow on the spatula and press it gently into the cup, filling the brass reservoir nearly to the top, but leaving a small space for the lid to screw down without forcing grease out of the threads. The fresh tallow settles into the cup with a soft, yielding resistance, and you smooth its surface with the flat of the spatula before wiping the rim clean with the corner of the rag. Then you replace the lid, turning it down with your fingers until it seats firmly against the brass body, not over-tightened, but snug enough that no dust or grit will find its way inside during the remaining hours of stillness. You give the lid one final, gentle twist, and the cup is done, its brass surface now holding a faint smudge of tallow from your fingertips that you wipe away with the rag, leaving it gleaming in the lamplight, like a small golden button on the dark flank of the machine. The next bearing along the crankshaft is the outer pedestal bearing, set into the engine frame a few feet further from the flywheel, and you shift your position on the oil-soaked floor planks to reach it, your boots making a soft, sticky sound as they lift from the wood. The grease cup here is identical to the first, a twin in brass that sits on its short-necked like a patient small animal waiting to be fed, and you go through the same motions with the same unhurried pace, unscrewing the lid, scooping out the darkened grease that has pooled in the cup's lower half, wiping the interior clean and filling it anew with the pale tallow that smells so cleanly of soap and rendered fat. The only sounds are the faint, dry scrape of the wooden spatula against the brass, the soft sigh of the rag wiping metal, and the steady hum of the lamps overhead, a chorus so quiet and so constant that it has become less a sound than a presence, a warm pressure against the ears that holds the silence in place. From the crankshaft bearings you move to the connecting rod, the long iron bar that will tomorrow rock back and forth in its steady arc, driving the flywheel with each pulse of steam admitted to the cylinder. The connecting rod has a bearing at each end, and you go first to the big end, which is the larger of the two and sits closest to the crankshaft. The grease cup here is mounted in a slightly awkward position, tucked partly behind a guardrail, and you have to reach in with your arm at an angle, feeling the warm metal of the rod against your sleeve as you work. The old grease in this cup is thicker than the others, less thinned by heat because this bearing runs cooler, and it comes away in a single, almost rubbery lump when you slide the spatula beneath it, leaving the brass cup nearly clean with one pass. You fill it with fresh tallow, packing it down gently so that it will feed slowly into the bearing when the engine begins to move again, and you screw the lid back on with a care that comes from knowing how important this particular bearing is to the smooth running of the whole machine. The small end of the connecting rod, where it joins the crosshead, is next, and you walk around to the other side of the engine, passing beneath the great, still curve of the flywheel whose shadow falls across you like a cool blanket as you move through its penumbra. The grease cup on the small end is smaller than the others, a dainty little brass piece that holds only a thimbleful of grease, and you have to bend close to see it clearly in the lamplight. The old grease here is almost black, darkened by the fine metal particles that have worked their way into the bearing during the day's running, and you take extra care to clean the cup thoroughly, wiping it out twice with the rag until the brass shines like new. The fresh tallow goes in pale and clean, and you replace the lid with a feeling of satisfaction, knowing that this small, hard-working bearing will start its next day of motion with a full meal of clean lubricant waiting to ease its travel. You work your way around the engine in this manner, finding each grease cup in its turn, each one a small brass sentinel standing guard over a bearing that will in the morning spin or rock or slide under the pressure of the steam. There is a cup on the crosshead slide itself, a flat brass reservoir that feeds oil to the polished iron channel where the crosshead block will run back and forth, and you fill it with tallow, watching the grease settle into the narrow groove that leads down to the sliding surface. There is a cup on the valve gear eccentric, a curious shaped piece that rides on the crankshaft and will push the valve rod in its precise timing, and you unscrew its lid with fingers that know the exact amount of force needed to break the seal of old grease without straining the fine threads. There is a cup on the governor spindle, high up on the engine frame where the spinning balls will rise and fall to regulate the steam, and you stretch to reach it, standing on the wooden box you use as a seat. your movements slow and steady so that you do not upset your balance on the worn, uneven planks. Each cup receives the same quiet attention, the same unscrewing and scooping and wiping and refilling, but the repetition is not monotonous because each bearing has its own small character, its own way of wearing the old grease, its own particular warmth or coolness under your fingers. The brass of the cups nearer the cylinder is noticeably warmer than those further away, still holding a faint memory of the steam heat that filled the metal during the day, while the cups on the outer bearings are cool to the touch, their brass surfaces feeling almost cold against your skin. The old grease varies from cup to cup as well, some of it thin and dark and oily, some of it thick and pasty, some of it carrying a faint metallic glint from the fine shavings of bearing metal that have worn away in the day's turning. All of it comes away unto the spatula, and all of the cups receive the same fresh pale tallow which you pat down with the flat of the blade until it sits firm and level in each brass reservoir. The round of the grease cups takes you in a slow circle around the engine, and as you move you become aware of the quiet that fills the engine house, a quiet so deep and so complete that your own movements seem to happen inside a bubble of soft sound that does not disturb the stillness but rather becomes part of it. The scrape of the spatula is a dry, rhythmic whisper that rises and falls as you dig into the tallow tin and clean each cup. The creak of your boots on the oil-soaked floor planks is a low musical note that sounds with each shift of your weight, a note that the wooden floor has learned over many decades and now gives back with the comfortable familiarity of an old song. Even the small, wet sound of the tallow settling into a freshly cleaned cup is part of the quiet, a sound so tiny that you would not hear it if the engine house were not so perfectly still, if the whole sleeping mill were not wrapped in the deep hush of the small hours. At last you come to the flywheel bearing, the largest bearing on the whole engine and the one that carries the greatest weight, supporting the massive iron disc that looms above you in the lamplight. The bearing housing is a heavy iron casting bolted to the engine frame, and the grease cup on top of it is larger than all the others, a substantial brass cylinder the size of a small teacup with a deeply knurled lid that gives a good grip for your fingers. You unscrew this lid with both hands, feeling the resistance of the old grease that has cooled and thickened into a tacky seal around the threads, and it comes free with a soft, satisfying pop that echoes faintly off the whitewashed walls. The old grease inside is a dark amber color, thick and smooth like cold honey, and you scoop it out with several passes of the spatula, depositing it on the rag which is now heavy with the spent grease from all the other cups, its cloth stained in patches of brown and amber and near black, a map of the engine's bearings recorded in oil and tallow. You fill the flywheel cup with fresh tallow, packing it carefully into the wide brass reservoir until it's nearly full, and you smooth the top with the spatula before wiping the rim clean and screwing the lid back down, tightening it by hand until it will turn no further without force. The brass of the cup is warm under your fingers, not from the day's running, which ended hours ago, but from the radiant heat of the boiler that fills the engine house with its steady, even warmth, a warmth that reaches every corner of the room and keeps the metal from growing truly cold during the night. With the flywheel bearing cup filled and sealed, you place the spatula on the floor beside the tallow tin and stand for a moment with your hand resting on the cool iron rim of the flywheel itself. The rim is smooth and dark, a band of iron 12 feet across that rises from your waist to above your head, its surface polished by the leather belt that runs against it all day long. It is cool now to the touch, cool and utterly still, and yet there is something in the way it stands that suggests motion even in its rest, a sense of contained energy that waits patiently for the morning steam. The iron seems to hold a memory of spinning inside its massive weight, as if the metal itself remembers the centrifugal pull that stretches it outward when the engine runs at speed, a memory that will sleep until the first hiss of steam enters the cylinder and the whole great mass begins its slow, unstoppable rotation. You take your rag, now smeared with the old grease from a dozen cups, and you wipe a smudge of dark oil from the flywheel rim, where a drip from the bearing above has left a thin, glistening trail down the iron. The smudge comes away easily, and the metal beneath it shines in the lamplight with a deep bluish-grey luster, the color of a winter sky just after sunset. You run the rag along the rim for an arm's length, wiping away the faint film of oil and dust that has settled there since the engine stopped, and you step back to see how the cleaned patch catches the light. a bright stripe on the dark circumference that will be invisible tomorrow, when the belt is running and the wheel is spinning too fast for any eye to see its surface. The tallow tin lid is pressed back into place with a firm push of your palm, and the spatula is wiped clean on the last clean corner of the rag, before both are returned to the shelf where they belong, sitting side by side like two tired workers who have done their shift and now rest. The rag itself you fold carefully, grease side inward, and you set it on the edge of the ash bucket, where it will wait for the dayman to decide whether it needs boiling or can serve another night. The engine house smells now of tallow and warm iron and the faint sweet paraffin of the lamps, a rich layered smell that is the smell of the night shift itself, as familiar to you as the smell of your own home. You make one more slow circuit of the engine, not to check your work, which you know is thorough, but simply to look at each grease cup in its turn, seeing how the clean brass lids gleam in the lamplight, each one a small golden point of light on the dark body of the machine. The engine seems to stand more contentedly now, as if it knows that every bearing has been fed and that it is ready to wake in the morning with no dry metal surfaces to grind or overheat, and you feel a quiet, wordless satisfaction that comes from doing a simple thing well and completely. The flywheel looms above you in the shadows, its great mass a silent guardian of the room, and the boiler breathes its steady rhythm behind the iron fire door, a rhythm that will carry you through the rest of the night without hurry or event. You return to the upturned wooden box near the wall and settle onto its smooth, warm seat, your hands at rest on your knees, your eyes moving slowly from pressure gauge to water glass to fire door and back again, watching the quiet machinery of the night turn through its slow, invisible cycle. The middle hours of the night have now settled over the mill, a deep and silent stretch of time when even the town beyond the gates seems to hold its breath, and you rise from the wooden box with a quiet sense that the moment has come for a longer look at the world beyond the engine house door. The fire is burning evenly, the pressure gauge needle has not stirred from its steady point, the water glass shows its dark, unwavering column, and all the grease cups sit full and sealed on their bearings, so there is nothing that requires your immediate hand. It is in these slow hours that you sometimes make a short tour of the main spinning shed, not because any duty demands it, but because the stillness of the great room is a thing worth witnessing, and because your legs welcome the gentle stretch after the long sitting by the boiler. You lift your coat from the peg near the door where you hung it hours ago, the walls still warm from the radiant heat of the engine house, and you slip your arms into the sleeves, not because you will be cold in the adjoining shed, but because the air there will be cooler than here, and the habit of wearing your coat on these small journeys is an old one. The door opens with the same soft click of the latch that you have heard a dozen times already tonight, and you step out of the engine house into the narrow, covered passage that connects it to the main mill building. The passage is short, no more than 20 feet, with a roof of corrugated iron that drips faintly with condensation, and the sound of your boots changes from the dull thud on the engine house planks to a sharper ringing note on the brick floor of the passage, each footfall echoing briefly between the close walls before fading into the darkness ahead. The door at the far end of the passage is a heavy iron thing with a simple bolt, never locked during the night because the watchman and the fireman are the only souls in the building, and you draw the bolt with a firm pull that makes a clean, metallic sound before pushing the door open into the main spinning shed. The change in the air is immediate, a coolness that wraps around your face and hands with the soft, dry touch of a cotton cloth, and the smell that meets you is different from the engine house. A smell of raw cotton fibers and old wood, and a faint trace of the whale oil that the day shift uses on the spinning mules. The spinning shed is vast, stretching away from you into a darkness that the few dim safety lamps cannot fully hold back, their small flames burning behind wire guards at intervals along the central aisle like a string of pale, steady stars receding into the distance. You stand just inside the door for a long moment, letting your eyes grow accustomed to the gloom, and gradually the great room reveals itself to you in shades of grey and black, the shapes of the machinery rising up on either side like the ribs of some enormous sleeping creature. The spinning mules are the largest of these shapes, long iron carriages that stand in parallel rows running the entire length of the shed, their hundreds of spindles pointing upward at precise angles, each spindle holding a thin, ghostly wrap of cotton yarn that catches the faint lamplight in a soft, silvery gleam. The mules are motionless now, their carriages drawn back to their starting positions, their complex systems of gears and pulleys frozen in the middle of whatever mechanical phrase they were speaking when the engine stopped at 6 o'clock. The floor between the rows of mules is swept clean. The cotton sweepings gathered into soft, pale mounds at the ends of the aisles that will be carded again in the morning, and the wooden floorboards creak gently under your boots as you begin a slow walk down the central aisle, not hurrying, not investigating, simply moving through the quiet space with the same calm attention you would give to a familiar room in your own house. Overhead, the roof rises in a steep pitch supported by iron trusses that crisscross the darkness like the bare branches of winter trees. And between the trusses, the long skylights are just visible as rectangles of deep blue that are slightly lighter than the black of the surrounding roof. No moon shines through these skylights tonight, but the faint ambient glow of the overcast sky is enough to trace the edges of the glass panes, each one a dim, luminous square that seems to hover above the shed. The air up there is still and cold, and it presses down on the warmer air of the shed in a gentle, invisible weight that keeps the cotton dust from rising, so that the atmosphere is clear and breathable, if cool against the back of your throat. You pass a row of throstle frames, smaller machines than the mules, their vertical rollers and travelling carriages packed closely together like a dense thicket of iron and brass. The throttles are eerily silent, their usual daytime clatter replaced by a heavy, waiting stillness that seems to hum at a frequency just below hearing, and you pause beside one of them to look at the fine roving that still hangs from a few of the rollers, a thin white thread that trembles slightly in a draught you cannot feel. Its movement the only sign of life in the entire shed. The thread catches the light from the nearest safety lamp and gleams for a moment like a strand of spider silk before the draught dies, and it hangs motionless again, a single fragile line suspended between the iron roller and the empty space where the bobbin waits. Your footsteps carry you further along the aisle until you reach a tall window set into the end wall of the shed, a window of many small panes held in an iron frame that reaches from the floor nearly to the roof trusses. The glass is old and slightly wavy, full of tiny bubbles and faint streaks that distort the view, but through it you can see the mill yard spread out below, the flagstones grey and ghostly in the faint starlight that has begun to filter through the thinning overcast. The yard is entirely empty, the cobbles gleaming dully where puddles from the earlier mist have settled in the low spots, and beyond the yard wall the terraced houses of the town are dark shapes huddled together under the night sky, not a single window lit among them. Even the gas lamps on the main street have been turned down to their lowest flicker, their orange glow reduced to a dim smudge that barely touches the brickwork around them, and the whole town seems to be holding its breath in the deepest hour of sleep. You stand at the window for a while, your breath making a small, fading cloud on the glass each time you exhale, and you listen hard for any sound from the outside world, any cartwheel turning on a distant road, any dog barking in a back alley, any voice calling across a courtyard. But there is nothing at all except the faint, eternal whisper of the river over the weir, a sound so constant and so deeply woven into the fabric of the night that you only notice it when you stop to listen for something else. The river's voice is a low, steady murmur that seems to come from everywhere and nowhere, a sound that has been flowing past this mill for longer than the mill has stood, for longer than the town has been here, and it will still be flowing when all the machinery in this shed has rusted away to red powder. You turn from the window and begin the walk back toward the passage door, retracing your steps along the central aisle between the silent ranks of machinery. The safety lamps still burn at their intervals, each one a small, steady point of yellow light that reflects softly off the polished iron of the nearest machine parts, and the shadows they cast are long and unmoving, falling across the floorboards in stripes of deeper darkness that you step through without breaking your slow, even pace. The spinning shed feels like a place out of time, a great hall of sleeping industry that dreams its own quiet dreams of cotton and motion, and your presence in it seems to make no disturbance at all, as if you have become a part of the stillness rather than an intruder upon it. At the passage door you pause and look back one last time, seeing the long vista of the shed stretching away into the dimness, the rows of mules and throttles standing in their patient, orderly lines, the safety lamps glowing like small, faithful guardians at their posts, the high windows holding their faint squares of starlight against the roof. Nothing moves, nothing creaks, nothing drips or settles or shifts, and the silence is so complete that you can hear the soft sound of your own breathing as clearly as if you were standing in a closed room. It is a silence that feels almost sacred, a peaceful emptiness that wraps around the machinery and the building and the night itself, and you let it fill your ears and your mind for a long, quiet moment before you step back through the doorway and draw the iron door closed behind you with a gentle, echoing thud. The passage seems warmer after the cool shed, and the sound of your boots on the brick floor is a welcome return to the familiar small world of the engine house, which you can already feel radiating its steady warmth through the inner door. You push the door open and step inside, and the heat of the boiler enfolds you immediately, a dry, kind heat that chases the coolness from your coat and makes your cheeks tingle as the blood returns to them. The two lamps are still burning with their steady, upright flames. The pressure gauge needle still holds its quiet point. The water gauge glass still shows its dark, unwavering column, and the fire behind the iron door still murmurs its low, contented song. You hang your coat back on its peg, the wall now carrying a faint trace of the cotton shed's dry, fibrous smell that will fade in the warmth before the hour is out, and you walk to the boiler front to make a small check of everything before you sit down again. Opening the fire door a few inches, you see that the fire bed is burning exactly as you would wish, the two pieces of coal you placed earlier now fully integrated into the glowing mass, their edges indistinguishable from the older embers, and the whole bed glows with a deep, even orange that pulses gently with the chimney draught. A few small blue flames still dance across the surface, their movements slow and hypnotic, and the sound of the fire is a soft, crackling whisper that blends with the hum of the lamps and the faint draw of the flue into a single, seamless note of peaceful industry. You close the door and check the ash pit, finding it still clean and empty, the grate bars dark and cool beneath the glowing bed above. Then you straighten and place your hand briefly on the warm brick casing of the boiler, feeling the gentle, steady heat that radiates through the clay and into your palm. The water glass is exactly as you left it, the surface of the water flat and dark at the 3/4 mark, and you give the gauge cocks a tiny turn each, just enough to see the water flicker in the glass and confirm that the passage to the boiler is clear and true. The pressure gauge needle has moved perhaps a single pound since you last looked, nudging just a shade above 45, and you leave the damper exactly where it is, knowing that the fire will hold this steady output for hours yet before it needs another small feeding. Everything in the engine house is in order. Everything is calm and steady and exactly as it should be, and you allow yourself a slow, quiet exhale that you did not realize you had been holding since you stepped back through the door. A gentle release of something that was not quite tension, but simply a tension, now eased. You return to the upturned wooden box and settle onto its smooth, worn surface, your back resting against the warm brick of the boiler, setting. Your hands folded loosely on your knees with the palms turned upward in a posture of quiet receptiveness. The engine house seems smaller and cozier after the vast, dark spaces of the spinning shed, and you feel the warmth of the room wrapping around you like a heavy blanket, the kind of warmth that makes the eyelids grow slowly heavier, and the thoughts grow slowly heavier, and the thoughts grow slowly softer. You do not sleep, because you are here to watch and tend the boiler, but you let your mind drift into a state of calm, alert stillness that is not quite waking and not quite sleep, a middle ground where the hours pass without hurry, and the soft sounds of the engine house are a lullaby that keeps you company until the sky outside the high windows begins its slow, imperceptible turn toward morning. The warmth of the boiler has been with you for hours now, a steady, dry heat that wraps around your shoulders and settles into your bones. And as the deep middle of the night passes without event, a quiet awareness begins to grow in you that it is time for the small meal you always take somewhere in these long, still hours. You do not consult a clock because the engine house has no clock, and even if it did, you would not need it, for your body knows its own rhythms as well as the boiler knows its pressures. You rise from the wooden box, your legs a little stiff from the long sitting, but not unpleasantly so, and you walk the few steps to the peg where your coat hangs, its pocket holding a cloth bundle that you have carried from home through the lamp-lit streets and into the mill yard. a simple supper wrapped in a clean piece of cotton sheeting. You take the bundle from your pocket and place it on the wooden shelf beside the tallow tin. Then you turn your attention to the black tin kettle that sits on the floor near the coal bunker, a humble vessel with a dent in its side and a wooden handle worn dark with years of use. The kettle is empty now, and you carry it across the engine house to the small iron tap that protrudes from the wall near the drain, a tap fed by the same cistern in the loft that supplies the boiler with its feed water. The tap handle is cool and slightly stiff, and when you turn it, the water rushes out in a thick, cold stream that splashes against the tin bottom of the kettle with a bright, ringing sound, a sound that seems almost loud in the deep quiet of the room. You fill the kettle about 3/4 full, no more than you'll need for a pot of tea and a little left over, and you carry it back across the floor plates, the water sloshing gently with each step, its weight a familiar pull on your arm. The top of the boiler shell is a flat, black iron surface that runs horizontally above the firebox, and there is a patch of this surface directly over the steam space that is always warm enough to bring water to a gentle simmer, but never so hot that it would boil furiously and spit steam into the room. You know this patch by sight, a slightly shinier area of the iron where countless nights of kettle sitting have polished the metal to a dull gleam, and you place the kettle precisely there, its flat bottom settling onto the boiler top with a soft metallic click that echoes once off the brick walls and then fades. The warmth of the iron begins to seep into the water immediately, and you know from long experience that it will take about the time of 2 slow pipe fills of tobacco for the water to reach the perfect temperature, a span during which you can prepare the rest of your small meal without any hurry at all. You return to the shelf and unfold the cloth bundle, laying it flat so that it becomes a small napkin on the boards, and you look at the simple food you have brought for the night. There are 2 slices of bread, thick cut from a dense brown loaf, each one spread with dripping that is soaked into the bread in a pale, glistening layer, the dripping carrying tiny flecks of the meat juices that give it its savory taste. The bread is slightly compressed from being wrapped in your pocket, but it is still soft and fresh, and the smell of it rises up to meet you, a mild, yeasty smell that mingles with the ever-present scent of warm iron and lamp oil. Beside the bread, a small twist of paper holds a pinch of tea leaves. Enough for 1 pot, the leaves dark and curled and smelling faintly of hay and distant hills, a smell that seems to belong to a different world from the engine house, but is welcome here nonetheless. You take the chipped enamel mug from the same shelf, a blue and white cup with a small piece missing from its rim that you have learned to drink from without noticing, and you set it beside the cloth. A brown earthenware teapot, small and round, sits on the shelf as well, its spout stained a deep amber from years of tea, and you lift the lid and drop the pinch of leaves into its bottom, the dry leaves rustling softly as they fall. The preparations are simple and few, and they take only a moment, but you do them with the same unhurried care you give to stoking the fire or filling a grease cup, because there is a quiet pleasure in doing even small things well, a pleasure that fills the long night with a gentle sense of purpose. While the kettle warms, you walk once around the boiler, your eyes checking the water gauge and the pressure dial and the faint line of light around the fire door, all out of habit rather than need. The water still stands at 3/4 full, the column dark and steady, and the pressure needle has not moved from its comfortable point. The fire murmurs its low, contented song behind the iron door, a sound that has become so much a part of the room that you only notice it when you stop to listen for it. Everything is exactly as it should be, and you can turn your attention back to the kettle with the calm knowledge that the boiler needs nothing from you for a little while longer. The first sign that the water is warming is a soft, high-pitched hum that begins to come from the kettle, a sound so faint that you might miss it if the engine house were not so perfectly still. It starts as a whisper, a tiny vibration of the tin against the boiler top, and then it grows gradually into a steady singing note that fills the space around the boiler with its clean, bright tone. You watch the kettle, seeing how a thin wisp of steam begins to curl from the spout, a pale, ghostly ribbon that unwinds into the warm air and vanishes almost as soon as it appears. The steam is not fierce or boiling, but gentle and patient, just a quiet signal that the water is nearly ready, and you let it sing for a few minutes more while you stand with your hands loosely at your sides, your face turned toward the warmth, your breathing slow and even. When the steam from the spout has thickened slightly and the singing has deepened to a low, rolling murmur, you take a folded rag from the shelf and use it to grip the wooden handle of the kettle, lifting it carefully from the boiler top. The kettle is hot now, its tin sides radiating a pleasant warmth through the rag, and you carry it the short distance to the shelf, tilting the spout over the little teapot so that the hot water pours in a thin, clear stream onto the waiting tea leaves. The water hits the leaves with a soft, hissing sound, and immediately the smell of the tea rises up, a rich, earthy fragrance that fills the corner of the engine house and makes the whole room seem suddenly more homelike, more sheltered against the dark night outside. You set the kettle down on the floor plates, keeping the rag beneath it so that the hot metal does not touch the wood, and you put the lid on the teapot, leaving the tea to steep for a few quiet minutes. While the tea draws, you take the 2 slices of bread and place them on the cloth in front of you, arranging them side by side, like 2 simple offerings. The dripping on the bread has softened further in the warmth of the engine house, its surface now glossy and almost liquid, and you lift 1 slice to your mouth and take a slow bite, the bread yielding softly and the savory fat spreading across your tongue with a mild, comforting richness. You chew slowly, your jaw working in a gentle rhythm, and you let your eyes rest on the steady water gauge while you eat. The dark column of water a calm, vertical line that anchors your gaze. The bread is plain and good, the kind of food that asks nothing of the eater except to be eaten, and you finish the first slice with the same unhurried pace, brushing a few crumbs from the cloth into your palm and then into the ash bucket. The tea will be ready now, so you lift the lid of the pot and look inside, seeing how the leaves have sunk to the bottom and the water has turned a deep reddish brown that the lamplight catches in a warm, translucent glow. You pour the tea into the chipped enamel mug, the stream of dark liquid filling the cup with a soft gurgling sound, and a curl of steam rises from the surface, twisting upward in a slow, lazy spiral that fades into the shadows near the ceiling. You lift the mug in both hands, feeling the warmth of the tea through the thin enamel, and you hold it close to your face for a moment, letting the steam touch your cheeks and the rich, grassy scent fill your nose before you take the first sip. The tea is hot, but not scalding, its taste mild and slightly bitter, and you drink it in small, quiet sips, each one a moment of warmth that travels down your throat and settles in your stomach with a comfortable, spreading glow. You eat the second slice of bread more slowly than the first, pausing between bites to sip the tea and to listen to the soft sounds of the engine house around you. The fire crackles faintly behind its iron door, a sound like tiny twigs snapping in a distant wood, and the lamps hum their steady, insect-like note high up near the ceiling. The boiler ticks once, a soft metallic sound as a rivet adjusts to the slow changes in temperature, and then it is quiet again. The river outside the mill walls continues its eternal murmur, a sound so constant that it has become less a noise than a pressure in the air, a low, watery undertone that holds all the other sounds in its gentle embrace. You sit on the upturned wooden box, your back resting against the warm brick of the boiler setting, and you eat and drink in the quiet companionship of the machinery, a sole human presence in a room built for iron and steam and fire. When the bread is finished and only a few crumbs remain scattered on the cotton cloth, you drain the last of the tea from your mug, tilting it gently to catch the final drops that gather at the rim. The tea leaves in the bottom of the pot are a dark, sodden mass, and you carry the pot to the small drain grate set into the floor near the water tap, a square of iron bars that leads down into a pipe running out to the mill culvert. You tip the pot carefully, letting the spent leaves fall onto the grate along with a small splash of the remaining liquid, and you watch as the water drains away through the bars, leaving the dark leaves sitting in a small, wet pile that will dry and be swept away in the morning. The smell of the wet tea leaves is earthy and faintly bitter, a smell that mingles with the warm iron and lamp oil and tallow until it becomes one more layer in the thick, comfortable atmosphere of the engine house. You rinse the teapot and the enamel mug with a splash of cold water from the tap, working the water around the inside of the mug with a swishing motion of your wrist before pouring it away down the drain, where it runs across the iron grate with a brief, silvery sound. The mug is clean enough for another use later if you want it, and you set it on the shelf upside down to dry, its chipped rim catching the lamplight in a small, sharp line. The teapot goes beside it, its lid slightly ajar, so that the inside can air, and you fold the cotton cloth that held your bread into a neat square, tucking it back into your coat pocket, where it will wait for the walk home in the early morning. The kettle, still half full of warm water, you place back on the flat spot of the boiler top so that it will stay warm and ready if you want more tea before the night is over, its tin sides already beginning to tick softly as they adjust to the renewed heat. With your small meal finished and everything tidied away, you stand for a moment near the boiler front, your hands resting lightly on the warm brick casing, your eyes moving slowly from the water gauge to the pressure dial to the fire door, and back again. The water level is exactly where it was. The pressure needle is steady, the fire glows its deep, even orange behind the iron door, and the engine house is as peaceful as it has been all night. The food and the tea have left a pleasant, full feeling in your stomach, a warmth that matches the warmth of the boiler and the warmth of the lamps. And you feel a quiet sense of contentment that has no sharp edges, no excitement, no hurry, just a smooth, even satisfaction that comes from simple things done in a simple way. You settle back onto the upturned wooden box, shifting your weight slightly to find the most comfortable position, and you let your hands rest palm upward on your knees in the posture that has become your habit through all the long night shifts you have spent in this room. The engine house wraps around you like a familiar coat, its sounds and smells and gentle warmth a world complete in itself, and you close your eyes for a brief moment, not to sleep, but simply to rest them from the soft, steady glow of the lamps. Behind your closed lids, the dark is warm and red, tinged, and you can still see the after image of the water gauge glass, a thin, bright line that floats in the center of your vision and fades slowly as the seconds pass. The fire rumbles its quiet song, the lamps hum their steady note, and the night moves on through its deep and silent middle, carrying you with it like a slow, dark river that flows without sound toward a shore you cannot yet see. The deep stillness that comes before any sign of morning has now settled fully over the engine house, a stillness so complete and so heavy that it seems to press gently against your ears like a soft, invisible cushion. The hours between midnight and the first pale hint of dawn are the quietest hours of the whole shift, the ones where even the town and its sleep seems to reach a deeper level of rest, and you sit in your accustomed place on the upturned wooden box, with the warmth of the boiler at your back, and the steady glow of the lamps in your quiet gaze. The fire has burned down slightly since your small meal, the embers behind the iron door still glowing a deep, healthy orange, but with a little more grey ash crusting on the surface now, the fine, soft powder that rises from coal as it gives up the last of its heat. You rise from the box and cross to the boiler front, your footsteps the only sound in the room besides the eternal hum of the lamps and the whisper of the chimney draught, which has grown fainter as the fire has settled. The iron door handle is warm as always, and you lift the door open just enough to look inside, letting the orange light wash across your face and the quiet crackle of the embers reach your ears. The firebed is still deep and even, but the bright center has moved slightly toward the back of the box where the draft pulls most strongly, and you see that the front edge of the bed has cooled to a darker red, the ash crust there thickening into a pale grey blanket that will need a fresh piece of coal to break through it. You close the door and walk the few steps to the row of coal you laid out hours ago on the floor plates, where 3 pieces still wait in their neat line, their dark surfaces cool and untouched since you arranged them at the start of the shift. You take up the shovel, its long wooden handle smooth and familiar against your palm, and you slide the blade under one of the remaining lumps of coal, lifting it with the same slow, careful motion you have used all night. This piece is a little larger than the others, roughly the shape of a flattened fist, and its surface is marked with fine, glittering seams of brighter black, where the coal has fractured along its natural cleavages. You carry it to the fire door and open the door again, the heat rushing out to meet you, and you place the coal gently on the near side of the firebed where the embers have cooled the most, settling it into the ash crust with a soft, crunching sound that sends up a tiny puff of grey dust. The new piece sits there for a moment, dark and unyielding, and then a thin wisp of pale smoke begins to curl from its underside, followed by a small tentative flame that licks upward and catches the edge of the coal with a blue-edged flicker that grows stronger as you watch. You close the fire door and wait, counting a slow count of perhaps 30 in your mind. Then you open it again to check that the new coal has taken hold. It has, its whole lower face now glowing a dull red that is already brightening to orange, the flame spreading across its surface in a thin, dancing sheet that reaches toward the center of the firebed. Satisfied, you close the door once more and return the shovel to its place against the warm brickwork, its blade carrying a fresh smear of black from the coal you have just placed. The fire will now burn for another long stretch without needing attention, the new piece giving its heat slowly to the boiler water as the hours pass. You turn your attention to the water gauge glass, which you have been watching all night with the same quiet, regular attention you give to your own breathing. The water level has fallen slightly since you last looked, not by much, perhaps by the width of your smallest finger, but enough that you notice it. This is the natural work of the night, the slow, steady evaporation of water into steam that occurs even when the engine is not running, because the boiler is still warm and the water inside it is still giving up a faint, invisible vapor that rises into the steam space and waits there for the morning. The water that has been lost to this quiet evaporation must be replaced, or the level will sink too low, and the boiler will run the risk of overheating its crown. And so you walk to the feed water valve that stands on the pipe leading from the cistern in the loft above the engine house. The feed water valve is a brass wheel set into a vertical pipe, its rim cool and smooth under your fingers, and when you turn it a half turn to the left you hear the water begin to move far up inside the pipe, a soft rushing sound like a distant stream heard through a thick stone wall. The sound grows louder as the water descends from the cistern, filling the pipe with its cool weight, and then it reaches the boiler and enters the water space with a deep, gurgling note that echoes once off the iron shell, and then settles into a steady, flowing murmur. You watch the water gauge glass closely while the feed water runs, seeing how the dark column inside the glass begins to rise, slowly at first, then more steadily as the pressure of the cistern pushes the fresh water into the boiler. The surface of the water in the glass trembles slightly as it rises, a tiny, rapid shiver that makes the meniscus dance against the brass backplate, and you wait until the level has returned to exactly 3/4 full, the same mark it has held all night, before you close the valve with a firm turn of the brass wheel. The sound of the feed water fades as quickly as it came, the rushing in the pipe dwindling to a whisper and then to a silence, and the engine house returns to its deep, heavy quiet. You check the pressure gauge, expecting to see that the inrush of cooler water has dropped the steam pressure by a pound or two, and you are not disappointed, the needle having eased back to a shade below 45 pounds, its black point resting quietly on the white enamel dial. This is normal, a small temporary drop that the fire will correct within a quarter hour as the fresh water absorbs the stored heat of the boiler shell and the fire bed beneath, and you do nothing to hurry it along, leaving the damper exactly where it is and trusting the steady, patient work of the coal to bring everything back into balance. With the water level restored and the fresh piece of coal burning steadily behind the iron door, you find yourself in a long, open stretch of the night when nothing at all requires your hands, and you return to the wooden box with the slow, deliberate walk of a man who has nowhere else to be. The box creaks softly as you settle onto it, a sound so familiar that you no longer hear it as a separate noise, but as a part of the greater quiet, a note in the long, slow chord that the engine house has been playing since you first stepped through the door. You let your back rest against the warm brick of the boiler setting, feeling the heat soak through your shirt and loosen the muscles between your shoulder blades, and you allow your breathing to slow until it matches the deep, measured pulse of the fire, each inhale drawn out long and thin, each exhale released with a gentle, soundless ease. The oil lamps have been burning for many hours now, and their flames still stand tall and steady inside their glass chimneys. But you know that the oil level in the fonts is beginning to drop, and that before the shift is over, you will need to refill them one more time. For now, however, they burn with the same quiet, golden light they have given all night, their glow reflecting softly off the whitewashed walls and the dark iron of the flywheel and the brass rims of the pressure gauge and the water glass. The shadows they cast no longer seem like separate darknesses, but like deeper parts of the same warm amber glow, soft and layered and full of gentle depth. And your eyes move slowly across the room, resting here on the polished curve of the connecting rod, there on the neat row of the remaining coal pieces, and finally on the fire door with its thin, bright line of escaping light. You become aware as you sit in the deep stillness of the tiny, almost inaudible sounds that fill the engine house when the larger sounds have all fallen away. The oil lamp on the bracket near the coal bunker makes a soft, fluttering sound if a draft slips under the door, though the door fits snugly in its frame, and the drafts tonight are few. The metal of the boiler casing ticks once, twice, a slow, irregular rhythm as the iron expands or contracts by microscopic degrees, each tick a tiny, bright note that hangs in the air for a moment and then fades. The ash pit door, though closed, breathes a faint sighing note as the chimney draft pulls air through the grate, a sound so low and constant that it might be the earth itself breathing in its sleep. You listen to these sounds without naming them, letting them wash over you like the slow, steady pulse of a quiet tide, and the hours pass without your notice, each minute indistinguishable from the one before it, each moment a smooth, seamless continuation of the calm. At some point in this deep stretch of the night you rise again, not because any duty calls you, but because you want to move your limbs and feel the solid floor beneath your boots, and you walk a slow circuit of the engine, trailing your fingers lightly along the cool iron of the flywheel rim as you pass. The flywheel is still now, utterly still, its spokes casting their familiar pattern of shadows on the far wall, its belt hanging slack and silent from the pulley above, and you complete your circuit to stand near the cylinder, where the polished piston rod gleams dully in the lamplight, its surface smooth and bright and ready for the morning steam. You place your hand on the cylinder casting itself, a great thick mass of iron that is still faintly warm from the day's running, the heat having soaked so deeply into the metal that even the long cool hours of the night have not drawn it all away. And you feel the quiet, latent power that lives inside the iron, waiting for the first hiss of steam to bring it back to life. After a few minutes you return to the boiler front and check the fire once more, opening the door a crack to see how the piece of coal you placed earlier has settled into the bed. It is now fully integrated, its edges indistinguishable from the surrounding embers, its whole mass glowing a deep, steady orange that pulses gently with the draft, and the firebed looks exactly as it did an hour ago, deep and even, and full of quiet, sleeping heat. You close the door and check the water glass, finding it still at its proper mark, the dark column as steady as it has been all night, and you check the pressure gauge, which has crept back up to exactly 45 pounds, and now holds there with the silent, unshakable steadiness of a thing that has found its proper place. Everything is in order, everything is calm, and the deep stillness before the dawn wraps around you like an extra layer of the blanket you do not need, because the boiler's radiant warmth keeps the engine house at a steady, comfortable temperature that asks nothing of you but to be present. You settle back onto the wooden box for the last long vigil of the night, your hands folded loosely in your lap, your eyes resting on the quiet glow of the water gauge, and you let the stillness fill you until there is no separation between the quiet of the room and the quiet of your own mind. The lamps hum their steady note, the fire murmurs its low song, the chimney breathes its slow, invisible rhythm, and you sit at the center of all of it, watching and tending and keeping the night in its proper order. A single still point in a world of motionless machinery and sleeping stone, and the slow, silent turning of the stars above the mill roof. The first sign that the long night is beginning to turn comes not as a sound or a change in the warmth of the engine house, but as a subtle softening of the darkness beyond the high, sooty windows. The square of sky visible through the upper pane above the flywheel has been a uniform black for hours, a black so deep and complete that it seemed to be not a color but a solid thing, a dark velvet pressed against the glass. But now that black has begun to ease, to loosen its grip, shifting by degrees so tiny that you could not mark them with any instrument, yet your eyes know the difference. The black becomes a deep charcoal, then a grey so dark that it is barely grey at all, and then, over the span of many slow minutes, it settles into the unmistakable deep blue that comes before the first true hints of dawn. You rise from the wooden box, where you have spent the long middle hours of the shift, your body moving with the slow, deliberate ease of a man who has been at rest but not asleep, and you walk to the nearest window to look up at the sky. The glass is cool to the touch when you place your palm against it, and the pane is still spotted with the fine, dark specks of ancient soot that no amount of washing can remove, but through it you can see the high, thin clouds that stretch across the sky in long, faint streaks, their undersides just beginning to catch a hint of the light that has not yet risen above the horizon. The stars that were sharp and bright when you stepped outside with the dayman a lifetime ago have now faded into the pale, even blue, their light withdrawn into the vast, imperceptible advance of the sun, and the whole sky seems to be holding its breath, waiting for the first true flush of morning. The change in the sky brings with it a change in the air, for the chimney draught has always been sensitive to the great slow rhythms of night and day, and as the outside air begins to press down with the first cool currents that precede the sunrise, the flue responds. You notice it first as a slight deepening of the sound that comes from the ash pit door, a soft, sighing note that has been present all night but is now a little stronger, a little more insistent, as if the chimney has woken before the fire and is calling to it. The draught through the firebed increases by a fraction, and behind the iron door the embers respond with a brighter, sharper crackle, the flames lifting and dancing with a renewed energy that makes the thin line of light around the doorframe flicker like a candle in a draught. You move to the boiler front and open the fire door to look inside, seeing how the firebed has brightened noticeably in just the last few minutes. The orange glow now shot through with streaks of yellow that ripple across the surface of the coals, and the ash crust that was forming on the older embers has been blown thin by the increased draught, revealing the bright, living heart beneath. The new piece of coal you placed some hours ago is now indistinguishable from the rest of the bed, its whole mass given over to the steady, radiant glow, but the increased air has made the fire burn a little faster than it should, and you know that you must close the damper slightly to keep the steam pressure from climbing too quickly in this last stretch of the shift. The damper wheel is cool and rough under your fingers as you take hold of it, and you turn it a careful quarter turn to the right, feeling the mechanism move smoothly inside the chimney pipe, the flap closing by a small, precise degree. The sound of the draft changes immediately, the bright, eager note softening into a lower, steadier hum, and when you look back into the firebox you see that the flames have settled, their wild, dancing quality giving way to the calm, even glow that you have watched all night. The fire is still bright, still healthy, but it is no longer racing, and the boiler will hold its steady pressure for the remaining time with no further adjustment from your hand. The sky has continued to lighten while you tended the damper, and now the high windows of the engine house show a definite pale blue that washes down the whitewashed walls in a thin, cool light, different from the warm gold of the oil lamps, a light that seems to carry a hint of the outside air even through the glass. The lamps themselves begin to seem a little dimmer against this new, natural brightness, their flames still burning steady and true, but no longer the sole source of illumination, their light retreating into a softer, more companionable glow as the morning makes its slow way into the room. You turn now to a task that has been waiting quietly all night, the ash bucket that stands in its corner near the boiler. The bucket is half full, the fine grey ash you raked from the pit in the early hours having settled into a dense, cool mass that comes almost to the bucket's middle, and you know that the dayman will appreciate finding it empty when he arrives, ready for the morning's work. You take up the bucket by its wire handle, the metal cool and slightly gritty under your palm, and you carry it across the engine house toward the door, your boots making the same soft, sticky sound on the oil-soaked planks that they have made all night. A sound that now seems like a familiar voice in the quiet. The latch clicks open, and you step outside into the mill yard, and the change in the air is immediate and complete. The coolness wraps around your face and hands with a clean, sharp freshness that smells of damp stone and river water, and the faint, earthy scent of the coal heaps that stand in the far corner of the yard, their black mounds glistening with dew in the pale morning light. The sky above the yard is now a clear, washed blue, the high clouds touched with the faintest blush of pink along their eastern edges, and the flagstones beneath your feet are dark with the moisture that has settled on them during the night, each stone reflecting the sky in a dim, wavering mirror. The mill buildings rise around you in their solid, silent mass, their many windows still dark but beginning to catch the dawn light in faint, silver glints, and the tall chimney of the boiler house stands against the sky like a dark finger pointing toward the fading stars. You carry the ash bucket across the yard to the ash heap that lies behind the engine house, a long, low mound of pale grey powder and clinkers that has been growing for as long as the mill has been running. its surface marked with the wheel ruts of the cart that comes once a week to take the ash away for the garden paths and the brick fields. The heap is cool underfoot as you approach it, the older ash beneath the surface having long since given up any trace of warmth, and you upend the bucket with a slow, tilted motion that lets the ash slide out in a soft grey stream, spreading itself over the top of the heap with a gentle sighing sound. The fine particles rise in a faint cloud that drifts for a moment on the still air before settling back onto the pile, and you tap the bottom of the bucket twice against a stone to loosen the last clinging dust, the sound ringing out sharp and clear in the quiet yard before fading into the soft murmur of the river. For a moment you stand beside the ash heap, looking out across the mill yard and the dark terraced roofs of the town beyond, and you see how the morning is beginning to stir in small, subtle ways. A thin plume of smoke rises from a chimney somewhere in the town, not from a factory, but from a kitchen range where some early rising soul has prodded the embers to life, and its pale column stands straight up in the windless air before fraying at the top into a soft grey feather. The river beyond the yard wall catches the first true light of the sun, its surface turning from black to a dull, moving silver, and the sound of the weir seems louder now, more awake, as if the water itself knows that the day is coming. In the distance, a single bird begins to sing, a short, tentative phrase that repeats twice and then falls silent, the first voice in the dawn chorus that will soon fill the trees along the riverbank. You do not linger long by the ash heap, because the boiler still needs you, even in these last minutes before the dayman arrives. And so you turn and walk back across the yard with the empty bucket swinging gently at your side, your breath making small, pale clouds in the cool air. The wicket door of the gate is still closed, the yard still empty, but somewhere in the town the coal cart man will soon be harnessing his horse to the shafts, the iron-rimmed wheels clattering over the cobbles as he begins his rounds. And if you listen very hard, you fancy you can hear the distant, faint ring of a shod hoof on stone, though it might be only the echo of a sound from your memory. Back inside the engine house, the warmth enfolds you once more, though it is a different warmth now than it was in the deep night, a little less necessary, a little more comfortable rather than sheltering. You set the empty ash bucket back in its corner and take up the small hand brush that leans beside the rake, a simple brush with bristles worn down to a stubble, and you sweep the area around the boiler front with a few light strokes, gathering the tiny scatter of coal dust and ash flecks that have accumulated during the night into a small pile that you tip into the bucket. The floor plates gleam dully where you have swept them, their iron surfaces clean and ready for the new shift, and you hang the brush back on its hook with a quiet sense of satisfaction. A check of the water gauge shows the level still steady at 3/4 full, the dark column as unwavering as it has been all night, and the pressure gauge needle holds its faithful point at 45 pounds with the quiet persistence of a friend who has kept you company through the long dark hours. You open the fire door for what will likely be the last time on this shift, and look into the firebox, seeing a bed of coals that is still deep and glowing, a little lower than it was at midnight, but still more than healthy enough to carry the boiler through the handover and into the morning steam raising, and you close the door with the gentle, careful motion you have used every time, the latch clicking home with a solid, reassuring sound. The oil lamps have burned down now, their fonts nearly empty, and you decide to let them gutter out on their own in the growing daylight, rather than refill them for the few remaining minutes of your shift. Though you trim the wick of the lamp near the water gauge one final time, snipping away the faint crust of carbon with the small shears so that the dayman will find it clean and ready. The glass chimneys are still clear, the light they give is still steady and golden, and they have served you well through the whole long night. Their quiet, constant presence, a comfort that you will not forget when you walk out into the morning. You take a final walk around the engine, your eyes passing over each bearing and grease cup, each polished rod and dart casting, each part of the great silent machine that has stood beside you all night, like a sleeping companion. The grease cups are all full, their brass lids gleaming softly in the mixed light of lamps and dawn, and the flywheel stands in its eternal patience, its rim clean and dark where you wiped it hours ago, the leather belt still hanging slack and ready above it. The engine is exactly as it should be, tended and watched and kept in perfect order through the long dark hours, and you feel a quiet, wordless pride that has no vanity in it, only the simple knowledge of a task done steadily and well. You return to the wooden box by the wall, but you do not sit, instead standing with your shoulder resting lightly against the warm brick of the boiler setting. Your arms folded loosely across your chest, your eyes moving between the fire door and the water glass and the slowly brightening windows. The sky outside is now a full pale blue, the pink of the clouds fading to white as the sun climbs higher behind the mill buildings. And the light that fills the engine house is no longer the cold grey of early dawn, but a warm golden wash that mingles with the amber of the lamps and makes the whole room glow with a soft, hazy radiance. The fire murmurs its low, steady song. The chimney breathes its slow, measured rhythm, and the first true sounds of the waking town begin to drift through the high windows. The distant rumble of a cart on cobbles, the call of a voice across a yard, the bark of a dog greeting the morning, all faint and far away and somehow deeply peaceful. The long night shift is nearly over now, and the engine house holds its warmth and its quiet and its steady, patient machinery in a final, perfect moment of stillness, waiting for the sound of boots on the stone steps and the opening of the door that will bring the dayman and the returning sun and the slow, certain return of motion to the great iron wheel that has dreamed all night of spinning. The footsteps come from a long way off, at first so faint that they might be only the settling of the ash in the bucket or the distant rumble of a cart turning onto the cobbled street beyond the mill gate, but they grow steadily louder, a slow, measured tread on stone that you have heard 100 times before and know without needing to think about it. The day fireman walks with a heavy, even step, the step of a man who has been climbing out of bed in the dark for 30 years and whose boots know the way to the mill yard better than his waking mind, and the sound of his approach echoes softly off the brick walls of the passage that leads from the gate to the engine house door. You straighten from where you have been leaning against the warm brick of the boiler setting, your arms unfolding from your chest, your hands dropping to your sides as you turn your face toward the door. The latch lifts from the outside with a clean metallic click, and the door swings inward, letting a rush of cool morning air into the engine house that swirls around your boots and makes the lamp flames flutter once in their glass chimneys before they settle back to their steady burning. The day fireman stands in the doorway, a solid, square-shouldered shape against the pale morning light, his grey cloth cap pulled down over his forehead and his coat buttoned against the chill that still lingers in the yard even though the sun is now fully risen above the rooftops. He blinks once, twice, his eyes adjusting from the bright outside to the warm amber glow of the engine house, and then he steps inside and closes the door behind him with the same gentle care you have used all night, the latch falling into place with a soft, familiar sound. He does not speak at first, because there is no hurry and because the words that pass between the nightman and the dayman are always few and simple, a quiet exchange of information that has been refined by repetition into its most essential form. Instead, his eyes go directly to the pressure gauge on its brass stand, reading the needle's position with a single, practiced glance that takes in the steady 45 pounds and holds it for a moment before moving on. Then his gaze travels to the water gauge glass, where the dark column of water sits at exactly 3/4 full, its surface flat and still in the soft lamplight. He nods once to himself, a small, slow motion of his chin that means he has seen what he needed to see and found it good, and then he turns to you with the faintest ghost of a smile around his eyes, the kind of smile that men who work together in the quiet hours exchange without needing to explain. You tell him the gauge held steady all night, that the water was topped up once from the cistern in the small hours, that the grease cups are all filled with fresh tallow and screwed down tight, and that the ash has been taken out and spread on the heap behind the engine house. You say this in a low voice, a voice that seems to belong to the engine house itself, quiet and unhurried and without any edge of pride or hurry, simply the facts laid out like the tools on the shelf, each one in its proper place. The day fireman listens without interrupting, his hands hanging loosely at his sides, his head inclined slightly toward you, so that he can hear every word over the soft hum of the lamps and the murmur of the fire, and when you have finished, he gives another nod, this one a little deeper, a little more final, the nod that says he understands and accepts and we'll take it from here." He walks past you to the boiler front and opens the fire door himself, lifting the iron weight with a sure, easy motion that matches your own. And he looks into the firebox for a long moment, studying the deep, even bed of glowing coals that you have tended through the whole long night. The fire still burns with a steady orange light. The last piece of coal you place now fully integrated into the bed, the embers pulsing gently with the chimney draught, and the dayman sees at a glance that the fire is in good heart and will raise steam quickly when he opens the damper for the morning start. He closes the door and turns back to you, and this time the smile reaches his mouth fully, a small, quiet expression that flickers across his weathered face and then settles into its usual calm lines. Now you take your coat from the peg near the door, the wool still warm from the hours it has spent in the engine house, and you slip your arms into the sleeves with the slow, easy motion of a man who is not rushing toward anything, because the walk home will take as long as it takes, and there is no clock waiting for you there. You button the coat from collar to waist, your fingers working the buttons with the same deliberate care you have given to every task tonight, and you pull your own cap from your pocket and settle it onto your head, the cloth cool against your forehead after the long warmth of the boiler room. The day fireman has taken up the shovel and the rake and placed them in their proper positions by the boiler front, and he has lifted the tallow tin from the shelf to check that it is still full enough for the morning rounds, and you see that he is already settling into the space you have left, his presence filling the engine house as naturally as yours did a moment ago. Before you go, you take one last look around the engine house, your eyes moving slowly from the pressure gauge to the water glass to the fire door, from the neat row of coals still waiting on the floor plates to the full grease cups gleaming on their bearings, from the dark, patient flywheel to the 2 oil lamps that have burned beside you all night and are now guttering softly as their oil runs low. Everything is in order, everything is calm and steady and exactly as it should be, and the room that has been your world for the last 10 hours seems to hold its breath for a moment, as if acknowledging your departure with a quiet, wordless grace. You turn to the day fireman and give him a single nod, the same nod he gave you when you arrived so many hours ago, and he returns it without speaking, his hand already reaching for the damper wheel to begin the slow work of waking the boiler for the morning steam. The door opens onto a mill yard that is no longer dark and silent, but filled with the pale golden light of early morning, the flagstones still damp with the dew, but now catching the sun in 1,000 tiny sparkles that glitter under your boots as you step outside. The sky above the mill buildings is a clear, soft blue, the high clouds of dawn having thin to faint white streaks that stretch across the heavens like the brushstrokes of a painter who has worked while the town slept. And the air is cool and clean and smells of river water and coal smoke, and the faint green scent of the countryside that begins just beyond the terraced streets. The yard is no longer empty. For the first of the day, workers are beginning to arrive, their footsteps echoing under the gate arch, their voices low and sleepy as they greet each other in passing, and the mill is starting to stir from its night of stillness, with the slow, groggy movements of a great beast waking from a long and peaceful sleep. You walk across the yard toward the wicket door in the main gate, your boots striking the flagstones with the same steady rhythm they have kept all night. And as you pass the main spinning shed, you can see through the tall windows that the safety lamps are being extinguished one by one, their small flames snuffed out by the arriving hands. The daylight now strong enough to fill the vast room with a clear, even illumination. The spinners and the pieces are arriving in their clogs and shawls, their faces still soft with sleep, their voices a low murmur that drifts through the open doorway and mingles with the sound of the river and the distant rumble of the coal cart finally turning into the yard. You do not stop to speak to anyone, because the night shift has its own quiet customs, and one of them is that the night fireman slips away without ceremony, his work done, his watch ended, the mill left in good hands. At the wicket door you pause and look back over your shoulder, your hand resting on the cool iron of the gate, and you see the engine house standing in its solid, brick-built patience, a thin plume of steam already rising from its chimney into the morning sky, the steam pale and clean and full of the promise of the day's work to come. The day fireman will have opened the damper by now, and the fire will be brightening behind the iron door, and the pressure gauge needle will be beginning its slow, steady climb toward the working pressure of the day shift, and the great flywheel will soon begin to turn, creaking at first, then smoothing into its steady, humming spin that drives the line shafting and the belts and the 100,000 spindles that fill the mill with their endless whispering song. But all of that belongs to the day now, to the day fireman and the day spinners and the day that is just beginning, and your part in it is done. You step through the wicket door and onto the cobbled street, and the mill gate closes behind you with a soft iron sound that marks the end of the shift as clearly as any clock striking the hour. The street is waking slowly, the terraced houses on either side beginning to show lights in their downstairs windows, the smoke rising from a dozen kitchen chimneys to drift upward in thin, straight columns that catch the morning sun in shades of silver and pale grey. A milk cart rattles past on the main road, its brass churns clinking together with each jog of the wheels, and somewhere a door opens and closes with a wooden thud, the sound carrying clearly through the still morning air. The river runs beside you as you walk, its voice a steady murmuring companion that has been with you all night and will be with you still when you climb the stairs to your own door and your own bed and your own deep, dreamless sleep. You walk home down the cobbled lane with your hands in your coat pockets and your collar turned up against the cool air, your body still carrying the warmth of the engine house deep in your bones, your mind still filled with the quiet, steady images of the night. The glow of the firebed, the tremble of the water in the gauge glass, the polished gleam of the flywheel rim, the patient, silent shapes of the spinning mules standing in their dark rows under the high-girded roof. The long night shift is over, and the engine house will keep its warmth and its quiet and its steady, breathing machinery through the day that is now beginning, tended by another pair of hands while you rest. And when the evening comes again, and the lamps are lit, and the mill settles into its nightly stillness, you will walk once more through the lamp-lit streets and the cool, damp air of the yard, and the fire will be waiting for you, glowing its deep, steady orange behind the iron door, ready for the night's first stoking.